I've experienced, especially in the nonprofit, where we look at what outcomes we want to have happened, when realistically I may have control over 2% of that outcome. I want to have made X amount of sales. I want to have 50% new membership growth. We want to expand and buy this new club, whatever it might be. But I may not have that much control over that specific outcome. What I have control over is that input. What can I do? What can I do in the day to day, in the week to week, month, quarterly, annually, that's going to then add up and compound? Because we get so hyper focused on the end point that we mistake that for what steps I need to take to get there.
Welcome to Leadership on the Links, the podcast that showcases innovators in golf course management and the issues they face. I'm your host, Tyler Bloom. In Leadership on the Links, you hear the stories of people shaping the industry from their first swing to their dream match. You feel like you're on the course playing with your most inspiring colleagues, having great conversations, digging into insights and sharing a few laughs. Our industry is changing. As a leader, you need to keep up on everything from trends to technology to best practices. Together, we'll continue to build world-class clubs and teams. Let's get to it. Enjoy.
Well, super excited to be joined today by a friend that I met a couple months back, actually in Nashville. We are entrepreneur business owners that belong to a group called Brand Builders Group that does a lot of different consulting on everything from sales, marketing, operations, entrepreneurship as a whole. And Zach King is joining us here today live on the podcast. So Zach, thanks so much for following up. And it's great to kind of reconnect a little bit, learn a little bit more. Like I was saying to you before we recorded, was actually pretty shocked when I saw some of your previous notes that are in there of what you did, including, I believe, speaking at, did I read this right? Like dozens of different countries?
Yes. Yeah. Hey, Tyler, very excited to be here. Yes, it was great to be able to meet you back in Nashville a few months ago and enjoy a fantastic Mexican dinner, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. So over a dozen countries in a former life and still part-time. I've worked with international NGOs, international missions organizations, traveled all over the world working with leaders in a variety of different capacities. From international media training has been most of my background. How do we actually take digital media strategy and use that to build communities? How do we build relationships digitally in a variety of different contexts? So whether that be speaking on stages, leading multi-day trainings, working locally with people on a radio station and saying, hey, how do we integrate social media or video production into your strategy and workflow here? How do we train those people up? So my wife and I, we've had a very unique opportunity and very exciting history of being able to just travel around and work on 4 of the 7 continents, but worked with leaders on 6 of the 7 continents. So yeah, it's been a very exciting time.
And one of the things, the commonality was that you're based in Northeast Ohio. Is that correct?
Yep. Northeast Ohio, Amish country, Appalachia, depending on, who you ask. But yeah, right about halfway in between Pittsburgh and Cleveland.
Talk a little bit about the role that you had there, and still have there, I believe, working with the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah. So I actually just transitioned from, being the executive director for a Chamber of Commerce here in the area. I had been on the board for 3 years prior, and entering into my 3rd year, had, been asked to step into and propose stepping into the president of the board here for our local Chamber of Commerce. And really because I could see what was coming. I could see what we could be and really had a passion and a vision to be able to bring that to fruition. Is a small community, very tight knit, very close, with all, everything that comes along with that of the small community atmosphere. And as we were transitioning and growing and realizing, hey, we should get back to our roots. We need to understand what it is, how we can support the community in a different way. Let's figure out how we can revitalize some different things. And then there was a bit of transition with the leadership. And then I was asked about halfway through, about 7 months into my presidency, to take a step down into the executive director role, to actually lead it in the paid position, because the board members are all volunteers at that point in time and still are. And so coming up on about a year ago now, I stepped in as the the executive director for the Chamber of Commerce here. And throughout that time, we had been engaging in conversations with with the regional chamber here as well, much larger, very different focus, but also a support and resource that we wanted to collaborate and work with together. And so entered into that conversation as the executive director to say, hey, how can we collaborate and resource each other? What is it about what we can bring to the table in understanding the small business, the small community? And when we say small business here, we would mean, roughly like anywhere from $150,000 annual revenue to $5 to maybe even $10 million, small business, where when you get into regional manufacturing, you got large businesses, and they understand that well. So we brought that understanding of how, as a regional or as a small chamber, we could work together and collaborate on a much bigger scale. So I actually just transitioned away from that about 3-4 weeks ago. So hence me launching into this new business, and wanting to just be able to speak to people, share with them about all of my experiences and what specifically I'm able to really am passionate about now.
Well, I think it's interesting too, when I think of the chambers of commerce, and we talked about this when we were in person, about relationships within the golf community, because every golf and private club that I know of works with their local chamber of commerce, in different capacities. So I don't know if that was new to you, if you'd ever been kind of in the golf and private clubs sector, but I mean, there's a lot of similarities to your work to what private club leaders are dealing with, in their community. So if it's okay, talk to me a little bit first about how did businesses leverage their chamber of commerce, and talk about your relationships there.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think, even though my paid tenure was on the shorter side, being a part of it on the board and leadership vision side for, coming up in about 4 years, chambers across the United States have gone through a dramatic shift over the last 100 years. There's been a lot of change there, and being able to keep up with the trends, keep up with the needs of businesses, in any industry is vital, right? Obviously, speaking about, how local businesses interact with their chamber, it really all comes down to value. What is the value that they perceive? What is it that they understand or believe that entity, the Chamber of Commerce or what club it might be, if you're talking about the private golf clubs, what value could they provide? Is it networking? Is it access? Is it education and training? Is it workforce development support? Is it just an institution in the community that gives back in different ways that they want to support and not necessarily try and glean something from? And so it really depends on what the Chamber of Commerce in that area is able to provide, excuse me, and what that small business or any business or entrepreneur is in need of at that point in time. But I think what's interesting is, like, talking and when to talk with you, Tyler, and also in a little bit of research, finding the similarities between both a Chamber of Commerce, what I'm speaking on now, and the golf clubs are fascinating. I think just the legacy, the history of that golf clubs bring are fascinating. So, I mean, I was curious, like, in my research, I seem to find that many golf clubs on average is probably well over 100 years. What was your take? Because you've worked with over 100, right? Golf clubs, just specifically in this business right now.
Yeah.
What would you say the average age is of those golf clubs?
Yeah, you kind of have this mix between modern clubs, basically, that have been built in let's call it the last 50 to 60 years. And then you've got a classic club, like you talked about, 100-year-old institutions, that were kind of founding clubs, probably not when their communities were built, but probably not that far after.
Yeah, which I find that's interesting. The newer bills being 50 plus years, right? I mean, that's still a pretty long run, right? For an institution, for an entity, and then you get 100 plus. And chambers of commerce are very similar as well, where there's just that longevity, that consistency, an institution within their community, a staple, if you will, but also needing to understand what kind of evolution needs to come about. And the leaders of those, particularly whether they be the general manager on the golf course or the club or an executive director or president of a chamber, when you've got a legacy institution like that, there are so many different variables and nuances to be able to lead in that kind of environment, right?
Well, there's an evolution of leadership too, as I think you probably know, you've seen, is there's an evolution of leadership. What was good 10, 15 years ago is,
Yeah.
I want to say, outdated a little bit. And what I mean by that is there's a different way the workforce, I think, adapts today as it relates to what they're looking for in employment, what they're looking for in a day-to-day job, what their career aspirations are, is a lot different than what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. So when you backtrack that back 30, 40, 60 years ago, it's, significant difference. So I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, obviously it depends on the industry and the individual and the size of the company. But even if we're talking about generationally, each generation, each individual is looking for something a little bit different. And I think obviously now there's so many different terms, work-life balance, all these different things. But I think one of the key things that's necessary is for everybody to take a breath. Just take a second, take a breath and realize, okay, we are different. How do we take a step back and respect and understand what that person is going through? Not that they're necessarily right. Not that what they expect is correct, but just understand where they're coming from. Right? Yeah. If I'm stepping into your job if I'm stepping into one of the places that you're searching for as a GM, I can't go in guns a-blazing as a visionary and say, this is how we're going to change it. Especially if it's one of the, what did you say, the classic institutions where it's 100, 150 years old. And that's one of the things that I had to realize with traveling around the world, meeting in different individuals, working in a chamber of commerce, building and selling my own business, working in nonprofit entities here in the local community and helping rebuild, revitalize some major events. As a visionary thinking 5, 10, 15 years down the road, it's so easy for me to get caught up in what I see could be possible. And I think that's one of the things as entrepreneurs is both a fantastic benefit and a fantastic blind spot as well. We can see what could be, but yet we have a really hard time explaining and communicating and understanding how to get there. And one of the key things that I had to learn the hard way after bouncing my face off the pavement a few times was, yes, I can have a fantastic vision. Yes, I can invite people in. Yes, I can be the champion for some fantastic and really good change that will set this up for the future. And I have to recognize what I'm stepping into. I have to understand what's the history that is coming into where I'm at. I am able to see into the future because I'm standing on a mountaintop. I'm standing on the mountaintop of the legacy and what other people have brought to the table already, right? If it's 100-plus-year-old legacy or 100-plus-year-old entity, there is so much history there that whatever the founder's intent, as I like to call it, sure, may have been appropriate for the time. And there may be 70% of what they had in place 100 years ago that may not fit today. Sure. But it's still important to understand what that 70% is so that I can appropriately move forward and build on it and communicate and share that vision and have a well-rounded vision that people will want to jump on board with.
So interesting that you talk about that. In a lot of our interviews, we're going a little bit sideways here, but in our interviews, a lot of times we ask, what's your first 90 days look like on the job? And a lot of times you hear from leaders and aspiring leaders, a lot of it's just listening. A lot of it's just gathering information and watching, observing, detailing the why things are being done a certain way, and that's in interviewing all the stakeholders, line level staff, mid management, executive management, board members. And as you probably know, most private clubs are non-for-profit associations. Right. And board of directors or board of governors, right? And they're non-paid volunteers. For sure.
Exactly.
So it's interesting that you said that, is some people come in with a vision for what they want. But a lot of times their first 90 days a year are making small little subtle changes. But for the most part, it's trying to learn what's going on. They're not starting a new business. They're not starting a new club. Although we do work with a lot of new startup clubs, which you'd find that interesting, but a lot of it's just respect the heritage of a club. But also, I think a piggyback question for you is, when you've worked with different organizations that are institutions governed by rules, regulations, operating procedures that they've been doing for many, many years,
Central bylaws.
yes, like how do they get unstuck from that while also like honoring that sort of tradition to move forward as society changes, the demands of what consumers are looking for? Same thing in the private club industry. You have a new wave of golfers that perceive it very different. They're coming in looking for 3 holes, 9 holes, maybe a putting course, short game. They're not looking to spend 4 hours there. And by the way, if they got a family, mama and the kids need to have activities that they can attend to as well. You know, if they're not solely focused on golf.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yes, definitely understand that multifaceted from the role of a GM or COO in the golf club, where you've got people kind of all around you that you're responsible to. You've got the members, you've got the staff that may be under you. You've got the members that are you're responsible to. You've got the board of directors overseeing you. So you have a lot of, interested parties that you are responsible to. Which is a nuance in itself, and we don't need to go down that rabbit hole of how to handle those stakeholders. But I think the biggest thing that you asked about being able to get unstuck is circling back around to what we were talking about earlier, where recognizing what you're stepping into. And as you were saying, with a lot of the people that you're working with, that first 90 days needs to be, as I've heard, and I like to say it, a listening tour. That is huge. And I think one of the things that I see that people tend to miss is understanding the longevity of the history. It's so easy to do the 365 interviews, right? The people that are all around you and understand what's happening right now. But with such a legacy institution, understanding where you came from, how did we get to where we are today? Yes, where we are is vital. Yes, where we're going is highly important. Having that focus, having that, intentionality of what you're building and that legacy future focused is very important. And how do we look at what's behind us? So one of the simplest things that I like to look at and recommend and tell people to do is we need to shift from what is it that my vision is? What is it that my intent is? What is it that my hope and passion and focus is going to be? And just very simply, every day, serve one person. If I can turn my focus and my intentionality to just from myself, whether that be selfish and inappropriate or completely appropriate focus on what I need to get done, to, hey, how do I just serve one person? How do I help get a roadblock out of one person's way? Whether that be my spouse, my children, one of my board members, one of the club members there, teammates, that just subtle shift of focus going from inside to outward is, when built up, and those atomic habits, right, just builds a mountain of being able to understand each other so much more clearly in the long run.
It's so funny you say that. We've had like a little bit of an internal, or I have, let's not frame it as the team. I have had some reflection recently and thinking about what our goals were when we first started the company to where we're at, where do we want to go? Sometimes I feel like you can get paralyzed by this big overarching vision that all sounds great on paper and it all looks good, but man, you get paralyzed from that. And I've kind of taken the approach, hey, let's focus on one conversation at a time. Focus on one, let's put that at one connection.
Yeah.
One project, one thing at a time. And let's try to bring that back to a daily activity or a daily intention. And if we do that and we make that sort of impact, it'll compound over time.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people, myself included, have a hard time recognizing, whether it be my visionary, my ADHD, whatever, or just, my weird genetic makeup. I can see so far down the future, but I have a hard time seeing that one step in front of me. The old adage of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And I have a hard time understanding which bite do I eat, because all of these little pieces look great. And one of the frameworks that I actually developed within my entire process is how to help the visionaries go from crappy and committed to go from polished and paralyzed to crappy and committed. Because it's so easy for us to want to polish this and we get paralyzed by it. And I've identified 4 different ways that we can get paralyzed, exactly what you're saying. But for us, at least for myself, and maybe for you as well, Tyler, being able to just say, okay, I am committed. It's going to be the crappy first draft, and that's okay. I just need to take a step. Like thinking about the first time I did video podcasts or went live on Facebook. I mean, it was the flip side of my studio here, and it was crappy. But it got me going. It got me the reps. I understood what I needed to do there. Reaching out to people, doing sales, speaking on stages, just committing to speaking about what I'm thinking about and what I want to work with people and help, the problems that I want to help people solve is really the key first step. And so I've identified 4 different types of paralysis that I've experienced, and I've worked with a lot of other people that have experienced. And I'd be curious to hear if any of these kind of resonate with you, Tyler, where we're looking at perfection paralysis, like I think everything has to be right or it's not worth starting. The second is there's no language paralysis, where I can see this vague thing 5 to 10 years down the road, but I don't know how to put words to it. I don't know what words exist to be able to move forward. And I think one of the other ones you mentioned was overwhelm paralysis. There's just too much to think about interacting with or engaging with right now. And I can't hold it all. I don't know where to start. I don't know what is the piece of the elephant to start with. Or, and this is one of my favorite ones, the shiny object paralysis. It's so easy for me to want to build the process to fix the problem, but not start it. And then go on to the next one.
All right, all of them, especially the shiny objects. And I think that's been something I've done a better job of. If our team is listening, I've done a better job of refocusing and keeping us central to one mission, one specific result, and not chasing every little thing, every little project. And, but yeah, I mean, all of those, I mean, the perfectionism side of it is something I still struggle with, because my name's on everything. My name's on the company. And it's hard sometimes to give that up when you can tweak little things or you have a different perspective. I'll tell you the one for me, Zach, is I'm a person that likes to gather intel and insights from a lot of different people to the point where I don't make a decision. And I think that's something that a lot of people probably deal with. I don't know if I should stereotype that, but sometimes taking too much information can paralyze making a decision versus just going with it, acting on it, learn from it. And a lot of times once I just make the decision, no matter what it is, it can be very simple. It doesn't need to be this, life changing event or decision. Sometimes just do it. But it's funny, man. I will tell you at home, I don't have that issue. I have that issue. If I want to go on a vacation or we want to go do this, or it seems like I can easily make that decision. Yeah. When it comes to professional type things, man, I agonize over the smallest little detail. And again, that paralysis by analysis comes in place. But yeah, every one of those I've experienced this capacity.
But you're right. I think, especially as an entrepreneur, as a founder, or even just leaders in general, I know they struggle with that because your name's on it. There is a level of, it's your reputation that's attached to that, right? And being able to separate what are the attempts that are going to really matter to my reputation, or who is it going to impact and influence when I do this. I mean, thinking about things that are not life or death situations, taking it out of the workplace. I've got 2 daughters. I got a 6 and an 8-year-old daughters. Most energy. And one of the things that they've inherited from me, at least the oldest, is the decision paralysis, analysis paralysis. Go to a restaurant and looking at the menu board And it's like, oh, do I want the burger? Do I want the chicken nuggets? Do I want the mini corn dogs? I can't
All right, I lied.
decide what it.
All right, I lied. So when we go out to eat, like that happens to me because it just depends. If I had like some decent meals throughout the day that I'm not, if I'm somewhere.
Yeah. A salad could be good.
Yeah.
But trying to be able to decide, and it's like, come on. Yes, it's not a life or death situation. Yes, you want it to taste good. You want to enjoy the experience. For me, I find, and I enjoy, being able to find the most value and the best taste for the least amount of price. My sister-in-law says that's one of my special gifts. And I enjoy that, but it's not worth a 15-minute decision or agonizing over it sometimes all day. Hey, we're going to go to the restaurant tonight and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, well, what do I want to eat? I have 7 hours until we're going to get there. I don't need to be agonizing over it for 7 hours. Let's think about the things that actually are going to move the ball forward. And I think kind of circling around a little bit, it's having that intentional focus on the future, right? When you know what your priorities are, you can then take a step back and say, okay, is this this loop I'm trying to close in my head, but can't close for whatever reason? Is the answer going to move the ball forward? And if not, giving yourself permission to have that open loop. That is hard.
As you were saying that, I'm just thinking of, we went through a process, like I said, this year of kind of refining where our focus is, what initiatives should we be taking on, where are we at as a business. And I'd been agonizing over this for months. And when I gave it to the team to review, everybody in the team was like, yeah, this makes sense. And I was waiting for somebody to be like, no. And for whatever reason, man, it like the light bulb went off. I'm like, all right, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And there's the lack of decision making. Again, we're probably in month 3 of that. From when we kind of said, here's where we're going. Yeah. I would say I'm operating with way more clarity, way more conviction, and still work to be done. There's still a lot of areas, internally that I have to work on, but I think that's probably consistent with even the clubs we work with. I mean, the same thing from the business standpoint. So many clubs still trying to figure out who do they want to be when they grow up. And once they get a little bit crystal clear on here are the key priorities over the next 3 to 5 years, I think everybody's then off to the races because it's really direct. It's clear. Here's the outcomes we're looking for. And we're not trying to be everything. We're going to be focused on these 3 to 5 initiatives.
Yeah. And I think that hyper focus, the hyper clarity, like you're saying, is one of the key things that a lot of people miss. They want to be all things to all people. They want to try and serve, even if they're in a niche industry of golf clubs, right? 100 years. But having that focus of what are the 3 to 5 things for the next 3 to 5 years that we're going to focus on. And one of the ways I like to look at it from the beginning is wet cement. Let's get it to 75 or 80%. We don't have to write these in stone to live on and live off of for the next 5 years. We're getting it to wet cement that can then be molded and shaped as we go. Because like you're saying, you just got to start. You put the effort in, you do the time and research and understanding, talk with the right people, the right stakeholders, get them down, talk with your team, review them. And then you got to start because you're not going to know what needs to be fixed until you've put it into play, right?
100%. And by the way, you learn a lot by just taking action. So much time spent on preparation, planning. And then it's like the age old Mike Tyson quote, plan works till you get punched in the face, right?
In the face. Exactly.
So here's a question. So now once you've you've seen organizations sort of commit to that one key specific initiative or focus or vision, what is the next step? And then how do you get that built buy-in from everybody, all your stakeholders, staff, board members, things of that nature from your perspective and experience?
Yeah. That's a few good questions in there. So trying to take them. Really that next step, once you get that vision of what's next, always a huge fan of Simon Sinek and everything that came before the start with why, right? Understanding that bullseye, that long term, what's the intent? Why do we exist? Why do as an entity or an organization, a club, even if you want to go down to the philosophical, why do I exist? We don't need to get to existential. That's a whole nother podcast, right? And then it's next the how and the what. What is it that we are actually going to do in our day to day to accomplish this long-term thing? And I mean, that gets into, then change management. I've used Kotter's change management method to understand how do you get buy-in? How do you have your central stakeholders understanding what's currently going on and moving through that process until you have your, the buy-in and people really on board. Kotter's method for change management I find to be very effective, very simple way of being able to help do that as well. But really it's walking it back, reverse engineering it. We know 5 years we want to have accomplished this. And one of the things I like to look at there when we're thinking about what I want to accomplish, it's the lead measures and lag measures. I've experienced, especially in the nonprofit and in the 501Cs that I've worked with. I've seen this in business as well, experienced this in business, where we look at what outcomes we want to have happened. When realistically, I may have control over 2% of that outcome. I want to have made X amount of sales. I want to have 50% new membership growth. We want to expand and buy this new club, whatever it might be. But I may not have that much control over that specific outcome. What I have, or that lag measure, what I have control over is that input. What can I do? What can I do in the day to day, in the week to week, month, quarterly, annually? That's going to then, like we were talking about earlier, add up and compound. Because we get so hyper focused on the end point that we mistake that for what steps I need to take to get there.
This is interesting because a lot of what you're talking about as well is experiences, and I'm just going to say a feeling of being alone that not many people know until they are at the top position. And that's something I've personally experienced, not just in this role, but in previous roles, is every time you kind of take that next step up in our world, going from basically an intern to now you're managing a small group, entry-level management, then into a mid-management position where you are managing people that you worked side by side with, then to being the person that calls all the shots. And now you're reporting to and self-responsible for yourself, others around you, and those that quite frankly don't know your job, but that's who you report to in a board and equity members. Mm-hmm. So, have you seen that with leadership in general, of how they deal with being alone? And that
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think, that isolation, that aloneness is really what I'm passionate about extinguishing. I want to eradicate that. Like, whether you've gone through a management course, you've gotten your MBA, you've been in a leadership position, you're in the weird middle ground leadership position of having a board above you and group below you that you're responsible for. We've all probably heard the adage, it's lonely at the top. Right? But why? It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, I think it shouldn't be that way. I think that we can get into such a competitive nature. We can get into such a cutthroat industry. We can assume that we are the only one that's experienced this. We can assume that by having questions, we're going to be perceived as incompetent and be replaced. We can make all of these assumptions of what is getting in our way. And again, this circles back around to the one thing that I recommend everybody think about doing daily is shift that focus from what's my problem? Where do I want to go? What do I need to do? If I'm alone as a visionary, am I not communicating it correctly? Are my teammates thinking I'm an idiot and just don't want to follow this? Is my board thinking I'm incompetent? Is my spouse just not thinking I'm mentally or emotionally there? Whatever it may be in that situation, turn that from my own self to somebody else outside of me. And that is the way to get outside of that loneliness. It's not easy, but it's one step at a time. And it's simple of what obstacle could I take out of somebody's way? Just helping cut my daughter's toast in the morning. That's a 30-second task. It's not fun. She could cut it herself. But by taking that time to say, hey, I'm going to invest in you in a simple way. Or it could be taking out a board member to lunch and saying, hey, tell me about yourself. You've been a part of this board for, let's say, 10 years. What can you tell me about your tenure here? What can I learn from you? Getting to, if you've got members in the clubhouse, sitting down with them and just getting to know them, then you can understand what it is I'm going to do to help make your life a little bit better. And I can serve you in a better, more profound, more intentional way. That isolation really tends to come from whether intentional or not, a little bit of selfishness. We're so focused on what we have going on that we forget that we are just a small little speck of everything else going on around us.
Man, I was just going to say one thing I keep hearing is a little bit about service-centered versus being self-centered. And I was thinking of that recently, and I think probably everybody's guilty of this in some capacity. Sometimes professional life becomes what the focus is, and that loneliness can be built just purely by pigeonhole yourself in the professional side, and you got the personal family side as well. Thinking about this sort of application probably applies just as much to the personal side as it does the professional side. And
yeah,
say that too is, man, and this is going to sound terrible. We went on a big family trip here this summer. We were in Europe, where I had no choice but to completely disconnect, because what are we going to do? We're in Europe. What am I going to do? Jump on a plane the next day and fly?
Right.
Solve a problem? No. We weren't. It was probably the first time, and I can't even tell you when I remember the last time, probably 6 years ago when I started the company, where I actually felt like, wow, this is what life looks like when there's no distraction. And I pulled away from like a sense of loneliness maybe going into that trip, and probably what I sadly may have created even internally at times, for my kids, my wife. It's a very thoughtful conversation, but I'm thinking about what you just talked about and saying, man, now I know what serving that our family needs to look like on a day-to-day basis just by being present, which is sad. Like it's not something I'm proud of saying, but that happens because I think the hustle of the next job, the next promotion, the next business deal, the next revenue number, the next whatever podcast achievement.
Yeah.
And created that sort of feeling of being stuck. And I didn't know it. I really didn't know it until I was literally halfway across the world.
Well, the first thing I want to say, Tyler, is you're not alone in that. Like, I know it feels isolating, feels alone, and I've been through that exact situation, actually traveling in Europe and having that realization. And I think there's so many facets, so many directions that we could go in there, but having the self-awareness for you, to recognize it in the moment or even shortly after the moment, and then being willing to share that with me, I think is what a vast majority of people would never do. They don't want to go there. They don't want to recognize that, whether they don't have the capacity, the expertise, or the knowledge, or the words, they're paralyzed, they're ashamed, whatever it is. By just voicing it is a huge step, right? Is a recognition that, hey, I need to shift something. And I believe that service is just is a state of being. It's a character quality that transcends anything. And it really, for me, it goes back to looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we look at his different levels, we had self-actualization, self-transcendence there at the very top. And I believe that the only way to actually get to that state, is to stop thinking about those things internally. What are my food, shelter? What are my basic needs? Being understood, important things. But then shifting that to outward focus and saying, how do I serve somebody? Because what that does, and exactly what you're saying, Tyler, is that I can stop thinking about what I'm worried about, what I'm stressed about. I'm sure you probably had times in your business in the last 6 years where you wake up at 2 a.m. and say, holy crap, how am I going to make this work? And you're laying in bed for 2 hours stressing about it, trying to figure out whether it's, how do I make ends meet? How do I get this team to gel? How do I grow this company? How do I make sales? How do I raise children? How do I connect better with my wife and be a better husband? All of those things that can hit at the same time can be extremely isolating and lonely. And it's so hard in the moment to think about what to do because we're so ingrained and focused on what's happening in the moment that we don't take the step back and say, oh, yeah, it's important to make sure payroll happens. And that's one slice of the pie of my life. I've got so much more that's happening here. And, thinking, you just mentioned as like an offshoot statement of hustle culture. Like I get so frustrated on Instagram and seeing all these hustle cultures and starting to see these big names now kind of switch back to, oh, maybe hustling for 16 hours a day to grow my business and scale isn't the best way of living my life. Yes, maybe that works for some people. It hasn't worked for me. I don't want to say that's never the good thing to do because maybe that's what some people want to do and it's thriving and it's fulfilling for them. For me, that balance is seasonal, and being able to expressly communicate that and understand that with my wife for us is what's worked. There are going to be seasons where life is a bit chaotic because I'm starting a new business or things with the chamber were tenuous trying to figure out dynamics, group dynamics, or hey, we have this event coming up in 3 months. So for 1 month, you're not going to see me much because I'm prepping and building this event up. And then after that, okay, life is going to be slower now. I'm taking time off so that we can go to Europe. I'm taking time off so that I can disconnect from that intentionally and be there for you and understanding what to do there.
You just said the word intentionality. And I think being able to, I learned this quote from somebody, if you don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. Right.
That's so true.
It's something that I've tried to apply more and more of like building my schedule week to week, quarterly, and, always flexible and adaptable. But this conversation comes at a point in the season for the golf industry, for the majority of the country and individuals that are listening, that their golf seasons are kind of coming up towards the third quarter, where things are busy. The summer's been a drag. It always is. It's tough weather. If it's hot, humid, rainy, and so you kind of lose some of that energy, lose some of that motive of what gets you passionate, what gets you up in the morning. Right. So this is a really interesting conversation at this time because a lot of people also feel alone and they've kind of put up things off, whether it's their health, whether it's their family, all sorts of things, because it's the season of life. It is the season of when people are paid what they're paid to do, specific in this industry. So I thought that this was some interesting comments that you just made, because I know I don't share that same thought of the season of life, and it changes. And our season really has become almost 12 months, but I have to be intentional about building in time blocks for myself, connect a little bit. I'm not great at it, but I thought it was a really interesting comment you made there.
Yeah. And I mean, we're never going to be perfect. Well, I don't think we're ever going to be perfect at something. And we're never going to be really good at something as we start it. My wife was telling me this about something the other day where I'm installing something new in our basement down here. And first attempt, and it started flooding the basement floor. I'm like, why the heck is this not working? She's like, well, you've never done it before. Like, sure, I watched some YouTube videos. Sure, I talked to, some professionals that knew what they were doing, but I'd never done it before. And so I need to learn and get those reps in and figure it out. But the season of life, that's an interesting, obviously we're taking a little bit of a turn, but I had to learn that it was that seasonality of life, whether it be within the season of the day, how I want to structure my week, or, quarterly, whatever type of season that is. And that's really where a lot of what I speak on now comes from, where I had a 1.5 year season of life when I was working with a church that was just nonstop for 18 months straight. And it was exhausting, and we accomplished a lot, but I burned out. And I had this great vision. I was brought on to build something fantastic, and we accomplished a good portion of it. And to everybody on the outside, it was very successful. But once I was done and I left, I found myself in this very basement for 2 months doing data entry, mindless data entry for some family members just to make ends meet, because I needed something that I could just disconnect from and not think about. And it was in that moment that I started realizing, oh, there's got to be more to a vision, to building, to the season of life, to hustle culture or growth than what I just put myself through.
Yeah, I feel, and so what have you, well, let me ask you this. What have you found now on the other side of it?
Now on the other side, is where I've come out building my guild process. It's a 5-step process to be able to help visionary leaders like myself understand how to move from stranded visionary to a collaborative community project or environment, to where they can where they can gather and rally the troops around a shared vision to move something forward into success. Ideally, that's going to outlive them. And it's really around 5 different pillars: growth, unity, influence, legacy, and drive. And we covered legacy and drive quite a bit here. And unity actually is one that I wanted to talk with you about a little bit. I know we're kind of probably coming up on an end of time here, but where we need to stop competing and start completing. And I know in your workforce trends research study, you explicitly said, I think, that along the lines where we need to be more unified. We need to work together. I understand that industry and many industries are cutthroat, where the jobs are highly coveted, where what was the average tenure is 3 to 4 to 5 years for top leadership. It's very a quick turnover. And razor thin margins, understandably, because it's a nonprofit and it's membership based. But one of the key findings you had in that research study, if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, was a mentorship of unity and that sort of things, where boomers and Gen X, there needs to be some form of mentorship within there to collaborate and work together. I know that would be a key thing to helping people get out of that isolation, that loneliness in leadership, if they just let their guard down a little bit and said, hey, I need some help figuring this out. I don't have it all together. Whether they be somebody 10 years, 20 years older, newer in the industry, we all have something to give. Let's take a minute and figure that out.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought that up. You're 100% accurate. Is that the industry is better working together than like as a separate entity? And I think probably, and you saw this probably in your work with the chamber, is there's only so much time, energy, and resources, and businesses oftentimes, have to look at, is it worth the time to do this? Who benefits? Yeah. We benefit, right? So there's a little bit of that pool. And then, I think of that there's different ways that businesses operate when they think of, and we're talking workforce development right here, is that each club, each business has its own way of doing things. There's a lot of times very shared language and very similar steps to the operation, steps to career development skills, technical skills, innovation skills, communication skills. There's a lot of shared unity in that, but there's also very separate, specialized type things depending on the club, depending on the leader, depending on the tree of management that they came from. So one of the things that we've recently done, and again, this conversation comes up at a really interesting time. We're actually going to host our first summit here in October.
That's exciting.
It is super exciting. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. Quite honestly, was very inspired by Brand Builders Group and going to the events and the engagement that they have there, and always thought, wow, I could apply the same thing to our industry, where you have different businesses from all over the world, really, and people have different perspectives. And when you put them in a single room, it makes the learning environment way better, because now you have shared experiences, pitfalls, successes, and just different perspectives. So that's kind of what I feel like we're trying to do, is unify common like-minded people from businesses that we work with, friends that we've worked with, to bring them to a place where they can get education. And that education is going to be access to 2 really unique speakers that don't come from this industry, as well as forced conversation and topics that they all have universally the same challenges: people, communication, career development, business development. I mean, these are all shared things.
Those aren't unique to the golf industry, Tyler?
No. Surprising, Zach. That's one thing we joke about oftentimes, is our industry kind of creates this shield, like we're the only industry that deals with these same kind of challenges. And it's been the coolest things about my journey in what we do, is now that I've had exposure to outside businesses, are actually a lot, very much the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. When I was in the Chamber of Commerce, that was my fifth nonprofit sector that I had worked within. And as we were messaging, I was joking with, okay, so golf clubs are 501c7. Maybe I'll dabble in that for a little bit. I can add, a sixth nonprofit sector. That'd be fun. But when I started out 15 years ago as just helping understand how do we take corporate digital media strategy and put it into a non-governmental organization, an international missions organization, or a international entity, and translate a lot of those, I spent a lot of time saying, what works here? What can work here? What do we need to separate? What works really here? Let's continue doing that and build on it. Because there's going to be a lot of differences, especially when you get into cultural nuance around the world. That really adds a unique layer to it that we don't need to dive into now. But there's so much that the business world does fantastically well. And now as I transitioned a few years ago to starting my own marketing agency, I turned that around and said, okay, I learned all of these business concepts and marketing strategies and applied them to the nonprofit world. What does the nonprofit world do really well that the business world needs help with? And really it came down to others focused, others centered service. A nonprofit, right, wrong, or indifferent, and sometimes to their own detriment, can focus on service above survival way too much. But I think that service is the key linchpin that helps them stand out from the rest. That service, others-centered mindset is what business, at least corporate American capitalism, can lack a lot of times today. And so, circling back around to what you were saying, where the problems that we're dealing with are not unique. Yes, we're going to have industry-specific things that are just focused on this. I mean, like when you talk about agronomy and course management, yeah, there's going to be things that are specific to a golf course that I'm not going to apply to my own lawn care out here. I probably could stand to because I have a lot of weeds out front right now. Anyways, so many different things that translate even through a nonprofit sector, but nonprofit to business sector. And just that simple realization that, hey, again, in this instance as well, we're not alone.
I've got one last question for you because I want to wrap this up here. This is really good. And anybody that's listening that feels a little bit maybe isolated or needs some help, make sure to reach out to Zach. We'll get your contact information and where to find you at here shortly. But if someone listening feels that they're in isolation right now, what's the one thing that they do today?
Man, I'm going to be beating a dead horse. It's that serve one person. Who is the easiest person in your way, in your day, that you can reach out to? I could blame it on my ADHD. If I don't do something when I think about it, whether it's make a note or do that action, I'm going to forget about it. It's gone. So whether that is write it down or particularly an easy thing that I like to focus on of just messaging somebody. I think a simple act of service is just messaging somebody that, hey, I'm thinking about you. We haven't gotten coffee for 6 months, 2 years, whatever. Just thinking about you today. Hey, I remembered when you did this for me. I appreciated that. Hey, when we talked the other day, you mentioned that you were struggling with this, and I know you like reading. I read this book or I listened to this podcast recently and made me think of you and the problem you were talking about. Just some simple things. What is it that I've done in my life that I have the experience to do or the knowledge or the understanding that I can then pass that on? It doesn't have to be, hey, this family just lost their home. I'm going to buy them a house. If you have the resources and the capacity to do that, by all means, awesome. But it could just be a simple, hey, I'm thinking about you. That is a simple act of service.
Dude, as you were saying that, a light bulb came up for me that I've got somebody I need to say that to, as literally you're saying that. So I appreciate that.
And you did it, right?
I did it.
Or at least made a note.
I know. I actually sent the text message out immediately.
Good.
So as you were saying that, I was like, all right, now I feel good, man. Now I'm unstuck, ready to go.
Hey, the day is a good day.
That's right. If people want to catch up with you, want to follow along in your journey, kind of what you're up to now, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Zach King there. Unfortunately, if you Google Zach King, you'll find the Final Cut King, who has done a lot of great things over the last decade. But if you go to Zach P. King, ZACH P. tylerking.com. You can find a little bit more about me there, and we can connect that way.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking some time with me today. And
Yeah, thank you, Tyler.
Hopefully we'll get a chance to see you up here in Northeast Ohio in the next few months.
Sounds good. Sounds good. You have a great day, sir, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Leadership on the Links. For more leadership insights and industry expertise, connect with us at bloomgolfpartners.com or follow us on social media sites LinkedIn and Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode of Leadership on the Links, we'd be thrilled if you'd leave a review or share it with someone who you know would get some value. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to stay updated. Thanks for joining us today.